In this episode, I talk with Donna McGeorge, the productivity coach, helping people to work smarter, reduce overwhelm, and take control back of their lives. So you can focus on what's important. She believes that growth comes from a commitment to intention, being deliberate in our actions, and that if we don't reflect and get clear on what's really going on, then we can't make positive change happen. But aside from that, this is a personal conversation. We laugh, we lean in of the fact that if space is the new rich, how do we find it? Is it thinking space, breathing space, living space, our working space? How do we make sure we've got something left in the tank so that we've got the capacity to do amazing things? Let's chat with Donna. Welcome to Reimagining HR with Trina Sunday, the rule-breaking podcast where we challenge our thinking and our current people practices. This podcast is for time-poor HR teams and business leaders who are feeling the burn, lacking laughs, and not feeling the love. I'm Trina, your host, and I'm here to cut through the BS, explore different ways of thinking, and create high-impact HR functions. Because happier, healthier organisations are better for our people and our bottom line. So if you are keen to flip traditional HR on its head, hit the follow or subscribe button so you're the first to know when new episodes drop. I'm here to help and also to shake things up. So let's get started. Welcome. I'm joined by Donna McGeorge today. She is the productivity coach, not just any productivity coach, people, the productivity coach. And she's passionate about helping people to work smarter so we can overcome overwhelm, take back control and focus on what's important. Wouldn't that be nice? Donna's worked with managers and leaders with organisations over Australia and Asia Pacific for the last 20 years. And she is all about helping people to learn to manage their time and their people well to produce great performance and results, which is what we are all about here at Reimagine HR. So Donna knows that when we decide to be intentional, that we can just surprise ourselves, right, with what we can achieve. And so I am super excited to welcome Donna today. Thanks for joining me.
I'm super excited to be here too.
Thank you. When I met you last year was in Brisbane, and I listened to you talk, and we were talking about, everyone's finding time. And you blew my mind when you started talking about space being the new rich. And I went home from Vegas with a completely different reflection and thought, and have been leaning into that ever since, which is part of why I reached out to you. So thanks for making the time. I mentioned to you that people talk to me. So a lot of my community, HR leaders, HR teams, business leaders, they're talking to me about workload, the pressure to perform, how competitive, unrelenting their environments are, no space, no time, no energy, fatigued, all those really glowing, brilliant things that people talk about when they're lost in the busyness. I'd love to know kind of what you hear when I talk about my community like that and what shows up for you.
Oh, look, the same. And I find it interesting because no one puts that in their job ads, do they? No one says, come to our organisation to be overwhelmed, out of control, probably fail at the important things, feel like work is relentless, drown in a sea of email and never have time for anything that's really important, right? And yet, when we show up at work, most of our workplaces have some version of that. So I was privileged to speak at the Human Resources Convention, which is where we met. And having worked in HR for, I've been in my own practice now for 20 years, but I hang around with HR folks. And prior to that, I was an HR person as well. We're like the plumbers with the leakiest pipes. We make sure that we attend to so many else, make sure everyone else is fine, their wellness is taken care of, that they're having their yoga Wednesdays as necessary. But gee, we're lousy at doing it for ourselves. And so we often in the HR world end up being the ones that are feeling it the most because we tend to not take as good care of ourselves.
And I think that there's a lot in that, because there's lots of clients that I work with that they're facing burnout ultimately. There's an obsession with more, delivering more, and something's got to give, right? I did your capacity quiz ahead of our talk, which you have on your website, which is free. And I'll put the link in the show notes because it's phenomenal. And I got my capacity savings plan as part of, built on your book, The One Day Refund. I'm really curious to hear how you talk about space. So that was a really interesting perspective because we talk about time a lot. Can you talk to me a bit about space?
Oh, gee, for someone who's a linguist, they're probably going to say these two things sound like the same thing, but they're not at all. So for me, space is almost akin to attention. So we have our attention switched on so much that we even when it goes quiet, we nearly don't know what to do. And so we've become a little unaccustomed to space, or just space to think, space to breathe, space to just be. And certainly, and I don't really want this to be just about the ladies, but certainly any of the ladies who are listening who are also, working mums, we never seem to have any space for ourselves. So there's a constant demand. It's like people are always wanting a piece of us. So I came to the conclusion that space was the new rich from a multiple range of perspectives. And it started with me musing once in the Qantas lounge when I was traveling. And I looked around at how spacious it was. And of course, I'm not suggesting that all people who are in the Qantas lounge are rich, but it's certainly taking up a lot of real estate in what would be a considerably expensive part of the world, right? Airports are, they're very particular about how they use their space. I thought, look how much space they're giving us. Not to mention, if you happen to be special, I got into recently I got into one of the chairman's lounges, which is only for VIPs. Now, I wasn't the VIP, just saying.
How'd you sneak in there? Talk us through it.
I just the door opened and I snuck in and then the door shut behind me. No, I was traveling with some very whiz-bang super-duper executive who had access to it. And it was this considerable amount of space and we were the only two people in it. And again, I thought, look at all this space. And then I started paying attention to that old thing that we used to think about when we were kids, is when you go to someone's house and you make an assumption that they're rich. And, when I'm old now, so when I was younger, it used to be things like if they had a dishwasher or a microwave or a remote controlled television, right? Oh, they must be rich. A swimming pool, 2-story house, 2 cars, all those things, they must be rich. Now, when I walk into a house and I see beautifully designed bookcases with room for plants and photos and a wooden duck, if I had one, and candles and stuff, and I think, they must be rich, because for many of us, we're using every piece of available space in our house. So, which brings me to the capacity quiz that you did. We do this in our heads. We just have so much stuff in our heads that when we can stop and breathe, quite literally, and think, it's rare. And so that's why I feel like it's a commodity that we need more of. And it's free, actually. So even though I say space is the new rich, it's actually free to get it.
It's all about access though, right? It's really interesting because you're so right, and especially because I have a small child, I have a kid in your 40s. They said it'd be fun, they said. But, it's one of these things where the cognitive load is real. And, lots of the HR leaders I work with are women or identify as women. And so there is a whole kind of world that goes with that. And there's a reality of that. But I think about space and the quiet and how uncomfortable we've come in that space. And I've heard about you defining space, and you talk about the space that you need for thinking and planning and growing. And we know that that's what you need for happy, healthy, productive workforces and lives. So it's like, well, how do we tap into this space, Malarkey Donna? Because you talk about, and I know when I did my capacity quiz, so let me share with people. So you talk about thinking, breathing, working, and living space. So 4 spaces that if we have it, then you talk about our adaptive capacity. Can you tell me more about what adaptive capacity is for those that might not know? And then we can kind of unpack kind of my results of where I need to focus some energy or not.
Don't look like that. It's all good news. At least you know, and now you can get to work on it. So adaptive capacity is my favorite thing. And it has its roots in Darwinian stuff. When Charles Darwin, look, some people say he didn't say it, but we'll just believe that he did because it's quoted on so many, Instagram pictures that it can't be wrong.
Can't be wrong. It's on Insta.
Not the strongest and fittest that survive, but it's the species most able to adapt. And so what adaptive capacity is, and this comes from the world of manufacturing, where, if a manufacturing plant is constantly working and producing stuff, it only takes one thing to break and the whole thing falls over. So they operate at minimal capacity. So they've got space to adapt and respond when things go wrong. And so with humans, it's more around life changes, stuff changes all the time, whether it's having children or changing our workplaces or changing the economy or governments or whatever. We're constantly bombarded with change. And I actually don't believe that people ever resist change. And I know there's a big intake of breath from your listeners right now, but actually it's they don't have the capacity or the adaptive capacity for it. Because when we have the capacity, we can take time to look at the change, think about how it's going to work for us. And the thing that's most awesome about adaptive capacity is that we then have the space to take advantage of the opportunities that change presents us. But more often than not, we're so swamped, back-to-back meetings, gazillion emails, then we rush home, shove food down our gobs, shove food down our kids' gobs, shove them off to bed, then sit down and do even more emails at night. We never have time to go, wait, what was that article I was just reading about that could be a massive and profound change in my industry that I really should pay some attention to so we can begin to adapt? Don't have time for that. So adaptive capacity is exactly that. And if any people are wanting to know how much specific capacity should we have, I talk about the 15% rule, which says that we need to have a gap of about 15% of space in our life. So if you look at your diary, if you've got back-to-backs all day, this is not including lunch, may I say?
Yep.
If you've got back-to-backs including lunch all day, then you have no adaptive capacity because you're then trying to do that in your spare time. So I'm going to suggest you need at least an hour a day that you block out just to stop, breathe, think. I think the best volume of time to do that is if you say, rather than an hour a day, say you try and do 4 or 5 hours a week in one block. So maybe you block out Friday arvos or something like that. Just having some space where no one is making any demand of you and you get to be very choiceful about what you use that time for. And straight up, that just gives you, the moment you open your diary and you see that chunk of time, you will literally breathe, right? Because you see it there.
Because we all know what it feels like, right? When you open a diary and it's full, it's back to back. I'm like, am I even going to get to go to the bathroom? What does this look like? And it's got to a level of the meeting vortex. And I know in your book, The 25-Minute Meeting, you tackle some of this as well. So that's definitely for those of us with meeting cultures in our organizations, it's definitely worth leaning into. But it's about consistency as well, right? If you've got that 15%, then you're leaving something in the tank to be able to kind of focus more energy into some of that thinking and the change. And I dare say, in that busyness that I described in my community, it's why we're not innovating as much as we need to be. And we're probably the slowest innovating profession that's around at the moment. And I think that part of what's contributing to that is not having the capacity to look at things that are new, to invest in our own growth and learning so we can level up what we do in terms of our people practices. I think is it 3M that talk about the 15% as well in terms of accidental genius? I love that. It's kind of because it's where the gold comes from, right? And if you don't have any time and space, then those thoughts are not going to come.
They've been doing it for decades because the accidental genius that came about with the invention of the good old Post-it note, of which there's a couple sitting on my desk right now, came about because someone was musing on a problem. Musing. Right? When was the last time you sat back and just went, I'm going to muse for a bit on this problem? And because they gave themselves the space to muse, the answer of, I wonder what would happen if we had a glue that did this. And I think it came about, I think the real legend around this is it was a failed glue. And then the person was musing on, what would you do with a glue that didn't stick the way you intended to? Let's muse on that for a bit, right? So still all musing. And I know that when I speak to HR professionals and I say things like, when was the last time you sat down and read the Fin Review? Now, this is not me, pushing any particular political or news agenda on you, or the magazine that's from your industry or any literature that informs you about what's going on. When was the last time you did that? And would you sit and do it at your desk? The first answer I get is, I don't have time for that. And the second one is, no, people would think I'm slacking off. And I'm like, no, it's probably your most important work is that stopping and just contemplating what's going on in the world. And, a lot of the times what happens is, and this is also okay, it's just, I guess you get one big dose of it. I go to the RE conference once a year and that's where I get my stuff. And I'm like, yeah, good for you. Not quite good enough. It needs to be regular on a daily basis that we're giving ourselves the space. Now, before I can see a question in your eyes, I can see you ready to move on to something. Just want to kind of comment on this idea of we're addicted to activity.
Yeah, talk me through that.
Yeah, it's a total dopamine thing. And we've been in trouble for daydreaming since we first started school. Like I'm remembering little Donna, who probably was sitting gazing out the window and being told very quickly by a teacher, stop daydreaming. And then, then I might have started doodling as I might have been processing, thinking. So that daydreaming is my brain going, you've just learnt a bunch of stuff. Stare at some trees right now while we process that for you. And then, now I can't stare out the window. Now I'll doodle. And I'm putting myself in nearly a semi-conscious state while I'm going, I just learned a whole bunch of +1s today in maths and how to do times tables. Let my little brain process that. But we got in trouble because we weren't concentrating and we weren't paying attention and we were this uptime state, which is why we all overdose on cortisol and adrenaline in our workplaces. So for me, daydreaming, boredom are all symptoms of an overdose and an addiction to activity. And so the first thing you want to do is on a week, so if you, just in case you don't want to be bothering anyone at work with this, on a weekend, how long can you sit without feeling like I really need to get up and do something? How long could you just sit and do nothing?
I would fail at that task incredibly.
How long?
I don't even know. Like it's even a minute would feel excruciating, which is a problem, right?
It is.
Like it's a massive problem. And it resonates so much because I'm Trina the Dreamer. That was me, Trina the Dreamer.
Yeah.
And it is, and especially with creative outlets, and the things that you express yourself differently to what our academic and learning environments are traditionally built to be.
Mm-hmm.
So for people like Trina the Dreamer who like to experience process and then just kind of chill out for a bit, it wasn't really conducive for that. So that resonates a lot. But sitting there, although I do also think that I would love to sit on the couch for a long time and do nothing, but I have a little person that would make that impossible. So that's also a little bit frustrating.
What lessons are you teaching your little person around that as well? So How many times have you said when your kids have come to you and said, I'm bored, and you immediately try and find some activity for them to do, right? Or, are they watching you on the go the whole time? Or so are they learning that? So it could just start with sitting on the couch for an hour, reading a book with your little one, which is just, let's just slow down the pace of life and just be with, right? Yeah. So I know anyone who's thinking doing nothing, baby steps. It could be reading a book. It could be, I do cross stitch, and I find that the most, it's very meditative, relaxing and calming for me. And so I cross stitch. So technically I'm not doing anything, but I'm certainly not thinking about my work, and I'm not doing emails, and I'm not scrolling social media. I'm not pushing more stuff into my head.
Your brain.
I'm actually chilled. So, yeah.
And it's a reflection that I've had a lot over the last 12 months in terms of my own personal journey, because it is, and even with my little one, she's on all the time and she's a firecracker and she's got energy for days and she's just energy to burn. And so it's about finding space, finding the quiet and getting all zen about things not being busy all the time. And so it's a habit and practice to build. And I think, and going back to my capacity quiz, so it's definitely, so for those that are curious, what came up for me in terms of those 4 spaces, and again, a reminder, it's the thinking, breathing, working and living space. And the area for me that seemed to be an issue most of the time is breathing space, and that I need to make some improvements there. So that's about saying no and letting go, people, right? Is that it in a nutshell?
Pretty much in a nutshell. And if you hadn't told me you'd done it and you said, I'm thinking about doing your quiz, just knowing that you're running podcasts, you're running your own practice, you've got a child, the way in which you're doing life, I probably would have guessed that because it's the profile that fits most working women. Because it's also the profile that says, I feel like everyone constantly wants a piece of me, that there's never a time that someone isn't asking or demanding something of me, whether it's at work or whether it's at home with whatever family arrangements that I have. And so it's hard because it's the one that needs the most help, and it's the one that never asks for it.
Yeah. It's the self-care space, right? It's like when we put ourselves last or not at all on that list. And so it takes a lot to work through. I heard you say once, no is a complete sentence.
Mm-hmm. I remember saying that at the conference because there was about 400 people in the audience and they all looked like you. They all just went, what?
I'm like, are you serious? I can just say no?
Yeah. So how about a smile on your face? Because that's helpful. Like, do it in a cheerful way. Hey, can you do this thing for me? No. Right?
But we do. We feel it with words though, right? Because we feel we have to justify why that is something we don't want to bring into our space. But how do people get to that?
Well, it could take 10 years of therapy to unravel why we just can't say no, right? Because we go no, and then we feel the urge to explain why. And, I say, I've watched people do this. They start out saying, let's say it's an invitation to a social event that I just have not got the capacity to go to. And so I start out by saying no, and then I go, because I've got just a whole bunch on right now. And then because the guilt then starts to kick in because you can see a little bit of disappointment in the other person. And so then I go, I'm sure it's going to be a really great event. And look, maybe if I get my stuff done really early, okay, well, fine, I'll drop in. And so they start saying no, and then they end up buying it back, right? They do the great thing by saying no, then they end up buying it back. So that's a warning on the label. Robert Cialdini, who wrote, when they people say he wrote the book on, well, he did write the book on the psychology of influence and persuasion. And there is a rationale, or there is a case for giving a reason, because people tend to respond better to whether it's a request for help or saying no if there's a reason. So I need your help because I'm blah, 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 blah. And no, I can't because I'm blah, 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 blah. Here's the thing, because we're so shite at it, and again, I don't know why. Look, if I was to be a bit religiously philosophical without wanting to be overly, sacrilegious, it could be 2,000 years of insert religious dogma, right? That says, and rules and stuff that says, so guilt is very prevalent as a tool in many religions. Better go to church on Sunday or you'll go to hell kind of thing. And so I think that's partly that it's ingrained in us, partly because we like to be liked. We don't want to let people down. And we haven't yet made the distinction between taking care of myself makes me way more likable than showing up grumpy to the most important people in my world, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's part of it. So you need to practice it. So I actually do this. I actually have a series of little phrases. And my favorite is, look, thank you. I actually don't have the capacity for that right now.
Capacity is a magical word, right? Yeah, and smile through it.
Got to smile through it.
At the end of the day, and even in a work context, capacity is the amount of work we can do in a given period of time, right? And if you look at workforce capacity, it's around, with the resources we have. If we look at workforce capacity planning, it's like no time, can't fit it in. And it's one of those things where it's easier if you don't really like the people. There's a fine line between being disrespectful and in trying to practice this quite brutally, and just to show how I don't always show up as a good human sometimes. But so I was invited to something and I just said, yeah, no. I'm like, oh, why not? And I just said, I just really don't want to. And that person, because I was beyond, like, it was in one of those moments, right, where my capacity was just blown. Like I didn't have any kind of emotional resilience left to kind of balance it out or even try to fulfill, the 6 principles of persuasion and look at likability and, what Robert talks about. And I'm like, I just felt like I just didn't have it to give. I'm like, yeah, nah, I just don't want to.
What I love about that is the radical candor of that. Now, I'm not sure I have the gumption, courage, whatever you want to say, to demonstrate that much radical candor, which is, which is classic Australian, right? Nah. Taylor Swift picked up that beautifully in her concert. I don't know whether you saw it, but she used that phrase on stage a couple of times.
I'm the one person in Australia that didn't go.
I didn't go see her either, but you couldn't open your eyes without seeing it. But anywho,
yeah,
because you're bang on, whether it's capacity for more work whether it's capacity on my weekends, whether it's mental capacity to think about stuff, there is a finite amount you can have. Yep. And I know people say they can keep pushing and pushing and pushing, but I feel like it's this balloon that you keep blowing air into. At some point, the balloon can only take so much before it's going to pop, right? Yep. And so I love that radical candor around doing that. I'm sure your listeners right now are thinking, oh, I could never do that. And so what's your version of that you can do with a smile on your face that you feel okay with, and practice it? So mine is, I don't go, yeah, nah. I go, look, thanks. Because, I'm going, look, thanks for that offer of a gazillion hours of work. And I don't have the capacity for that. And resist the right now thing, right? So my urge to go, I don't have the capacity for that right now. And then they're going to jump on that. Oh, well, when can you?
Yes.
And now suddenly you've bought it back again, right? So thank you. I don't have the capacity for that. Full stop.
No, complete sentence.
Sentence, right? No.
Who knew? So I probably didn't need to add I just don't want to. I should have just stopped it.
Well, they asked why, right? So they said why, and you said, because I don't want to. Now, if someone says why and you don't feel like demonstrating that much radical candor, you could just say, they say why, it just doesn't work for me right now.
Yeah.
Or it's just not in my, I don't know, plans. I have other things I need to do, all of which is true, which also equal I don't want to, right?
And for those that are wondering, I did and have maintained that relationship and got it to a place where, there's something to be said about being human in those moments, I think, and then just, smile through it, but not just genuinely. And I laugh a lot.
Humans respond well to authenticity, right? So, let's just say I said to you, I don't have one, but if I said, would you be on my podcast? You went, yeah, no, I don't want to. I'd probably go, oh, okay. And then my brain would probably go, that's freaking refreshing, because so many people would go, oh, okay, sure, let's book it in, and then ghost me via email or avoid it or can't put it off, then cancel it. And these are the things we do. We say yes, our brain says no, and then we have this, barrage of activities that we have to do to continue to maintain that avoidance. Whereas it might be a bit brutal. Yeah, nah, I don't want to, but boom, full stop, and let's move on, right?
Yeah, we've got other things to do, so let's just do it. Because that's what happens and what shows up in our work as well, right?
Yes.
So it's where we find ourselves when we don't have the capacity, then that's when we are over-promising and not delivering, and we lose credibility. So, when I work with HR teams and it's about, I can't get a seat at the table, and it's like, then, and again, coming back to the principles of persuasion, it's kind of like it's that credibility. It's it's all of those aspects that, you need to be able to deliver. Like there's consistency. And so when you talk about having the 15% in your diary, then you're going to have a buffer in there to be able to kind of give to more things. When you talk about kind of being realistic around what you can commit to, it shows up in all spaces of our life, right? Like it's a tool for life.
What's a weird thing, particularly in corporate land, where someone more senior, so my calendar's full. So you said before you open your diary and your calendar's full. My brain goes, and there's probably 2 or 3 things on overlapping in certain timeframes that you've somehow said yes to, or you're expected to go to. So not only do you have one thing in a diary, you're going to have 3 or 4 that you're trying to figure out how I'm going to manage. So it's triply overwhelming. But we have this tendency to, I call it an assumption of unreasonableness, where internal client or someone more senior says, hey, Trina, can I get you in my diary on Thursday at 3:00? And you've already got something in there, but because they're more senior, you assume they will be unreasonable if you say no. And then you think it is unreasonable for you to say no. And so I say, I wonder what would happen if we adopted an assumption of reasonableness. You've already got something at 3. It is perfectly reasonable for you to say, I've already got something at 3. Can we do it at 4, or can we do it tomorrow, or can I do it next week? Or you get a sense of what it's about and you go back and say, look, I could do 3, and I'm pretty sure you're going to ask me about X, Y, Z. If you give me till Monday, that gives me a couple of hours to prepare, or gives me some time to prepare what I think you're after. Whereas what we do, and I assume that they'll be perfectly reasonable about that, right? Because they're humans, of course they are. And yet we go, oh, the CEO's asked for a meeting, I have to accept it. Really? What would happen if you didn't? And, oh, I might get the sack. Now, anyone who works in HR knows how hard it is to suck anyone. So just saying, no, I'm not going to attend a meeting is not going to get you sacked, or it's not a career limiting move or any of those things.
Yeah.
It's simply reasonable human beings managing unreasonable demand, right?
And the question of reasonableness, say that 10 times fast, is also, what would be tested in a general protection claim or anything else. So
right.
I think, so I would
we get reasonableness, right?
So I think, yes, stand strong in your reasonableness assumption, because I think the word productivity as well, and I hope this isn't offensive when I say this, but I feel like it's become, given the work you do, an evil word in a work context. And I think we've made it something else. Like, what does productivity kind of mean to you when you're coaching your clients and when you're working with organizations? Like, how are people talking about it, and do they get it?
Oh, I don't think they really get it. I just think so for me, this is not a popular word, and maybe I'll write a book about this one day, the joy of satisfactory, because I think it's, are you getting done what needs to be done? Right. So I always to say to people, come straight back to whatever your KPIs are, OKRs, whatever you're working with in your organization. Am I getting done what I said I would get done? And that's your guiding light. So that's an indicator number one of, am I being productive? The other measures are, am I also being productive in all the other really important aspects of my world? So I measure my productivity, not just what did I get done in a day, but my physical and mental condition at the end of the day. Do I go home and fall onto the couch and have nothing but monosyllabic answers for the most important people in my world, and therefore have no energy or anything to give them? And so I would say I might have got a lot done, but that's not good. I want to finish my day and then come home and have stuff left in the tank for that important stuff. So that's kind of how I think about it. But it really is, if I write down a list of all the most important things for me, am I getting those done? Yay. The only thing I'd say, and your listeners would be acutely aware of this, is that we're still, or we've, come out of 4 to 5 decades of downsizing people, but never downsizing the workload. In fact, sometimes upsizing the workload. So if I was to think back on my past, and I know technology's helped and there's, other legit reasons, but most people these days are probably doing the workload of 3, right? Just flat out. And it's a hard thing to talk to an organization about, saying that, we need to, in effect, triple our workforce in order to have what we would consider a proper level of capacity of work. But it's the truth. And so we got to figure out ways, I think. Don't wait for an organization to fix it, because they won't, but figure out, how do we help ourselves and help our people manage that better? And so some of the strategies here's a bit of a plug, sorry about that. This book,
yes,
that's the one, just talks about, thank you, simple daily ways that we can just find that extra bit of capacity in our days by working a bit smarter. And that's really what I'm about. Is I think we are pretty, not slack, slack's the wrong word. No one's slack. I don't think we work very optimally. Let's put it that way. So we could work more optimally if we followed a few simple techniques.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really kind way of saying that. Well played.
Slack as in we're slacking off. I just mean that we don't apply attention to, could I do this better? Could I have done this smarter?
Yeah.
Could I have done yesterday better? And how do I do today better? We don't, that's what we're slack about. We never think about that. We don't make time for that, right?
Yeah. And I talk to my clients about that, because it's that reflection, and people can say, oh, this like woo-woo, like reflective journals. And I'm like, no. If you don't look at how did I feel, and I love that, looking at productivity beyond what you smashed out during the day, but what condition were you in when you got home? Because I think that that's really critical, and we don't look at that. We apply a productivity lens around our work and not around the rest of our most important people who are not at our work. So I think that's really awesome. But I think it is about kind of when we're in that space, we know that organizations are asking, especially HR people, for big things, right? Like, give us high-performing teams and help us to work optimally. It's all about efficiency and cut. oh, but while you're there, could you contribute to creating a positive culture in our organization? And I'm like,
it's endless.
I'm exhausted just listening to it. So again, like this capacity being used in different contexts, like I love that because it's kind of like, well, we don't have the capacities to do all of those things that take decades and are a long game.
Mm-hmm.
Because, what we'd often then do is we'll go harder, we work longer hours, we do more with less, as you talked about, because we've downsides. Like those are the pitfalls, right? And so it's trying to shift mindset, which is part of why I wanted to reach out to you, because it's broken. Like the way we look at it's broken. And it's why I'm seeing so much fatigue in HR especially, and what HR teams have come through with COVID and that whole, not having put that oxygen mask on first type concept, and then never really being able to lean back into it normalizing. Like
they've just maintained that pace, right? So you kind of think HR was the front line of corporate world, right? So we know we had our frontline health workers dealing with all of that, but in corporate world, it was HR that just were the frontline workers. But this is true not just for HR. It's true the pace and the changes that we made, even if I talk about I worked from home, and so my workday started an hour earlier because I didn't need to commute anymore, right? That was one of the reasons I wrote that one-day refund book. A lot of us have maintained that.
Yep.
Right? And so we're still working these ridiculously long hours and doing ridiculously long days and having constant meetings about everything. So it's almost like we expanded our workday and we just have never contracted it back, right?
Yeah.
And I know you're going to say, how can you help our people do that? And so I'll jump
Donna.
in a bit. Yeah, can I just fix all the problems of the world? That would be great.
Tips, tricks, hacks, levers.
Right. I'm going to say start with yourself first, because I want all of your listeners and for you, Trina, to be your best selves, right? So the first thing I'm going to say is don't wait for policy, because you're going to write the policies anyway if there are going to be any, but don't wait for policies or for whoever they are up there to make decisions about this. You decide from now on and for the rest of my life, I'm the boss of me and my time and my schedule and my energy. And I know when I do that, I do a better job. So the starting point is the afternoon. So whatever day of the week you're on, doesn't matter, but you're going to start by this afternoon. So whenever time you're listening to this afternoon, sit and think about what are 3 things you could do right now that will make tomorrow a bit easier. So like if you've got a family, for example, for me, that would be getting the kids' school stuff all sorted and at the front door, ready for an on-time departure tomorrow morning.
To the Qantas lounge.
Right. Okay, I've been doing a bit of travel lately. So, you said put your own mask on. I'm like, okay, let's throw over. And
where's the bubbles?
There's the exits and, there's a whistle and a light if you need attention. And so if you don't have kit, that's okay, right? All power to you. But it might be, what outfit am I going to wear tomorrow? So make that decision before you go to bed. You'll eat healthier if you do meal planning the night before. So what are some things I can do right now? So I do stuff like, I know tomorrow I have to work on a PowerPoint presentation. And so I might just spend 15 minutes right now just doing a 5-point outline of what I want that to be. And it's a double whammy. I've given myself a starting point for tomorrow, so I'm not starting cold. I've also put it into my brain, so my brain will process it overnight. So the next morning I'll probably have a scathing idea about what I want to do in the presentation as well. So for me, it's what could you do in the afternoon that your future self will thank you for? And that's where it starts. And that's where that's the stepping off the vicious cycle. You can't start it in the morning because the kids are already ratty. The kids have already run around. You already couldn't find, little Susie's soccer boots before you needed to head off for school today. So the day's already off to a crap start. Do it the night before. Yeah.
And because that's a big part of what you talk about, isn't it? It's like deliberate action, deliberate intention, knowing exactly, what's important, what you need to fulfill, and then actually kind of deliberately focusing on that. I could talk to you for days, Donna, because I think the other, when you talked about do something for the next day and afternoons, I think it's also about understanding the way that you work best. And from a personal perspective, that's different for different people. And I think there's some real opportunities to kind of lean into, well, when are you the most productive? And when do you need to do your best work at what times to be able to kind of get good results? And that's something that you've talked a bit about. How do you think people figure out what that looks like in terms of their day?
So most of us, so let's say 75 to 80% of us, have a chronotype or a body clock that says that we tend to be more morning people. And some people, like early birds versus night owls. Okay, so what are you? What's that face about?
Yes. For those on the podcast and not watching this, I am absolutely a night owl. Does that mean I should be? Donna's going to tell us.
No. It just means that you know yourself better than I do. So, it's like all very well to say Donna McGeorge should tell you what to do, but you know yourself better than I do. So you would know in the day when is your most alert. There'll usually be 2 or 3 hours where at your most mentally alert. Now, for you, that could be the afternoon. The only time I'd say for some of my night owl friends is that sometimes our prime time is bang on when we're picking up kids from school and we're doing homework so just be conscious of when that is. For early birds, it tends to be anywhere between about 8 and 12. So it depends. So I'm actually, I get up early. I'm up usually around 5:30, 6 o'clock most mornings. I go for a walk. I have some brekkie. My work day, my brain starts to kick in at around 8. I start my first kind of bit of work around 9, and I can, like, to use your phrase, smash stuff out until 12. And then I have lunch, and then I spend the afternoon doing routine stuff that doesn't require my brain to work. And I try as hard as possible to book my meetings and podcast interviews and things of this, like, as much as possible in the afternoon where I have that, opportunity to be that flexible. And so I'm going to say, for most of you, test it. Don't believe anything I say. Test it. Is the mornings the time when you feel the most alert? If not, figure out which couple of hours in the day. And then I'm going to say, block out that time. Do not give it away willy-nilly. That's the time where your productivity, as in the stuff you can smash out, will go through the roof. And you're also working with the clock in your body rather than the one on the wall, which means your brain and body is tuned in for that. So you get it's like a double whammy. I get even more, and I feel good because I'm doing what my brain and body wants to do, as opposed to, I'm sure you've had this, I know I have, where you feel like you're just dragging your sorry ass around the place, just trying to get stuff done. This is so hard and I don't want to think about it. And right. Whereas when you're in that prime time, you're on and you're good,
Yeah. And so you need to know when that is, right? And I think there's an element of the way that I work that I've kidded myself into thinking that night owl is, and so I'm intellectually tuned in enough to know that there's reflection in that. And I think, yes, take longer to warm up in the morning. Everyone that's ever worked with me would say this. So I do routine things in the morning, but still that creative, innovative thought leadership, content creation, those things, a sweet spot is generally still kind of between, 10 and 2 kind of thing. And I think that understanding what that productive window looks like, depending on the structure of your job, is really important to reflect on, because if you want space and you want to make sure you've got capacity, then you need to make sure you can smash the things out at the times that are best for you. Otherwise, the work takes twice as long, and that takes up more space that you could be giving back to yourself.
Or you make mistakes, it has to be repeated. So for the listeners, if you're wondering how you do that, it's a bit woo-woo, not quite as reflective woo-woo, but a little bit woo-woo. So you just set an automatic timer on your phone to remind you every hour, and you just give yourself a score out of 10 on how energetic you're feeling, right? So, a 1 would be, I really need a nap, and a 10 would be jump it. And, of course, everything in between. And I know sometimes you're going to be thinking, it depends on the work I'm doing. And I'm going to say I disagree, because when I'm in my optimal state, I can do any shit job. Right? I can do my BAS, which is probably my most shit job that I think about doing. So I can do anything in that space and I can power through it. So it isn't necessarily, am I liking what I'm doing right now? Is what's my energy right now? And you do that for a couple of weeks and you'll start to see a pattern and you'll say, okay, yes. So you're absolutely right about that. Am I a created night owl? Because sometimes it happens when you have kids, that if you have the kind of kid that does keep you up in the night, your body clock shifts. It could be that if you're, as you are in Western Australia,
yes,
and so you may be doing work later in the day or early. I don't know. What would you be? It might be earlier, so that may not work. But, it might just be that you've learned it through just bad habits of sitting up late watching telly. You may have learned it at uni when you did cramming assignments and study late at night. I just recently read something that said that it was an evolutionary thing. The reason human beings wake up when the sun comes up, and lots of other critters do this as well, was a survival instinct. We had to be up and alert and ready to go so that if we were attacked or we were hungry or whatever, we could look after ourselves. And so the night owl version is rare-ish and not, I want to call them mutants, but that's really too strong a word, because we are physiologically designed to wake up when the sun comes up and go to sleep when the sun comes down. That's how we trigger melatonin and all that sort of stuff. And so if you're not doing that, you're doing contrary to evolution and the human, physiology.
Yeah. So this little mutant then would say that there's probably, there's elements of, I think, we work and do some of this night stuff though, because we haven't protected the space we need and haven't had the capacity to fit in all the things. So it's like anything, right? And in the council, we give our clients even, and the advisory services, it's root cause stuff, like fix the core problem, not what the symptoms are. And so thank you for that. And to close us out, Donna, I'm keen to know if you were reimagining HR or the way we work, what would that look or feel like to you?
Right now, and I know your listeners are going to be like, oh, not that again. I actually think AI is the actual technology that's going to give us back space that's been promised to us since the bloody printing press was created 1,000 years ago, right? So for years, we've been told that technology is going to give you more leisure time. And in fact, the early iterations of email were meant to save us so much time, right? But I don't think anyone says, God bless you, email, for giving me back all this time. Like, said no one ever. I actually think, HR talks about wanting to get out of the nitty-gritty and get out of the, reactionary and transactional aspects of HR and get into the strategic and planning and co-creative and org design and all that kind of juicy, cool future stuff. So if I was reimagining it, I'd be saying, get on AI as fast as you possibly can. Move all the shit admin. Sorry for swearing. I'm a bit sweary. Move all the admin and stuff off your table and then make yourself available for that glorious work. And just to challenge you a little bit, and this happened a long time ago. Flight Centre, I was working with them, I'm going to go maybe 15 years ago. So this is how ahead of their time they were. They just decided not to have any admin staff anymore. They just went, no admin, no receptionists, no one gets a secretary or, assistant, And they said, because if it's that important, you'll find a way to do it. If it's not, it just won't get done. And nothing much changed.
Interesting.
So all this admin, so it's almost like humans create admin. So if I was reimagining HR, I'd say just stop doing some of the admin. I mean, what would happen?
Just stop it. Just say no.
A whole bunch of people just vomited in their mouths right now as I said that as they're listening to this.
Just say no.
Right. Can you do this admin? No, I don't want to.
No, I don't want to. Can you imagine? Oh, I love it. Donna, thank you so much for joining me. I've loved our chat and look forward to giving you an update on how productive I've become.
Awesome. Can't wait. Thanks, Trina.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in and leaning in to this week's episode as we look to reimagine how we show up for our people, organisations and community. Reach out to us via our website at reimaginehr.com.au with your HR horror stories or suggestions of people you'd love to hear from or topics you want to explore. It's all about people, purpose and impact, and we are here for all of it. Until next time, take care, team.